In this video, we are going to cover the single target and AOE rotations for Blood Death Knight. Let's begin by looking at a single target rotation that you can use during boss fight encounters. You should be able to see on the screen right now a list of steps that describe a single target rotation boss fight scenario. Let's begin by looking at step 1 in the scenario. The first thing we do is cast Outbreak. The way Outbreak works is anytime you cast it, it applies both of your diseases. It applies Blood Plague and Frost Fever without consuming any runes. Casting Outbreak allows us to cast 2 Heart Strikes followed by 2 Death Strikes. If you look at the cooldown for Heart Strike, each Heart Strike consumes 1 Blood Rune. If you look at the tooltip for Death Strike, each Death Strike consumes 1 Unholy Rune and 1 Frost Rune. Right after step 5, all of your runes should be on cooldown. From this point on, you'll want to cast Rune Strike whenever it's available. The abilities that you use from this point on depend on the circumstances at that particular moment. For example, if you're taking a lot of damage from the boss, you'll want to use Death Strike. If you have a need to generate more threat, you'll prioritize Rune Strike in that case. Okay, let's go ahead and demonstrate the single target rotation on this target dummy. First thing we want to do is cast Horn of Winter, get in range, Outbreak, followed by 2 Heart Strikes, followed by 2 Death Strikes, and then use whatever runic power you have for Rune Strikes. Now again, as we mentioned, the abilities that you use at any given point in time are dependent on the situation itself. If you need to generate threat, you'll want to use Rune Strike. If you need to heal, you'll want to use Death Strike. In an AOE situation, if you need to hit multiple targets, you'll want to use Heart Strike. So it depends entirely on the situation. Also, it's really important that you keep your diseases up at all times. And that is the gist of the single target rotation. Let's move on to the AOE rotation for Blood Death Knights. The AOE rotation differs from the single target rotation in that you will be making use of Death and Decay and also Pestilence. Typically a way that I'll open up, let's demonstrate right now on these target dummies. What I'll usually open up with is Death and Decay. If Outbreak is available, I'll cast Outbreak and then spread the diseases with Pestilence. So let's go ahead and demonstrate right now. Death and Decay, get in close, Outbreak, Pestilence, then start spamming Heart Strike whenever it's available. As you can see, we're spamming Heart Strike whenever it's available. It hits 3 targets. And Rune Strike, I'm keeping my eye on my runic power also. And Death Strike. Now we want to get our diseases back up. They're about to fall off. That's something you want to prevent. You want to make sure that you're keeping your eye on your diseases also. When they fall off, you'll have to reapply them with Pestilence. But really, that's the AOE rotation in a nutshell. In this section, we're going to discuss some miscellaneous best practices and tips for playing a Blood Death Knight. The first tip is about using Bone Shield. As a rule of thumb, I usually only use Bone Shield after I have everything under control in the pull. The reason why, if you look at the tooltip for Bone Shield, is it consumes 1 Unholy Rune. So that said, in a way, you're trading Bone Shield for a Death Strike. And you may not always want to do that. For that reason, I'll usually wait until like I said, the pull is under control, and then I'll use Bone Shield. The next tip is to prefer Blood Boil over Heart Strike when you're dealing with very large packs of mobs, like when there are 6 targets and up. If you look at the tooltip for Blood Boil, it says that it boils all enemies within 10 yards. If you look at the tooltip for Heart Strike, it only strikes 3 targets. Let's focus a little bit of time discussing survival abilities that you can use as a Blood Death Knight. It's important to understand that Vampiric Blood is sort of like the equivalent of a Warrior's Last Stand ability in that it increases your health for a brief period of time. Also, Icebound Fortitude is the equivalent of a warrior's shield wall, in that, as you can see from the tooltip, it reduces incoming damage. It's also useful to be aware of the benefit of casting Raise Dead followed by Death Pact. What this does is, obviously this Raise Dead will summon your ghoul, and then you can immediately sacrifice the ghoul to heal you for a pretty big percentage, 25% of your maximum health. And the last thing that I wanted to briefly cover in this tutorial was how you can leverage Lichborn and Death Coil for a self-heal. In fact, there's actually a macro that you can use. A lot of websites are talking about this macro. I'll bring it up right now. Let's see where I have it bound to. Here it is right here. The way it works is you cast Lichborn. Now what Lichborn does is it turns you into an undead. If you look at the tooltip for Death Coil will heal a friendly undead target. Well, if you cast Lichborn, you become undead. So the Death Coil can be used as a self-heal. And that's exactly what this macro does. It casts Lichborn, and then it casts Death Coil on yourself. And that wraps it up for our best practices and tips section. In the next videos, we're going to walk through a real-life example in the context of a 5-man dungeon that will show you how to tank as a Blood Death Knight.